family. That attack near Bagram was the deadliest involving NATO troops in Afghanistan since 2012. Let's bring in Congressman Brad Sherman. He's a Democrat from California. He's a leading member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, thanks very much for joining us.
Good to be with you.
It looks like the situation in Afghanistan, despite the billions that the U.S. has poured in there, despite the enormous military involvement, is falling apart right now. How concerned are you?
I don't think it's falling apart. I mean, obviously, we've got to focus on Helmand Province. Kunduz was contested. We were able to take that back. But we're in maybe the 20th year in our struggle against jihadist violence, and one would suspect that that's going to last decades more into the future. Afghanistan is just one of the many battlefields.
Do you think those 10,000 U.S. troops, part of a 13,000-member NATO contingent in Afghanistan, should stay there?
I think so, but I think we've got to be looking at everything from Paris to San Bernardino, from Nigeria.
And you think U.S. taxpayers spending billions of dollars in Afghanistan, that's money well spent?
If we ignore the Middle East will still not ignore us. We have been dragged into this civil war, four-way civil war for the future of Islam. And even in those areas where we haven't been involved, ISIS, Al-Qaeda have found that by attacking us, they can build their credibility in the Middle East.
But the Afghan military, you would think they have hundreds of thousands of troops, armed, trained, financed by the United States largely. After 14 years, you'd think they'd be able to control their own country, but they can't.
Karzai was not a good leader. There's a lot of corruption in that force. There are units that are relatively free from that corruption. But we will see a seesaw battle in various provinces.
ISIS is on the move right now in Afghanistan, in addition to elsewhere throughout South Asia, the Middle East, North Africa. As we all know, the Afghan military, obviously not necessarily up to the job, but the Afghan president, Ashraf Ghani, right now, he's traveling to Azerbaijan in the midst of Helmand Province potentially falling to the Taliban. What's up with that?
I don't know why he's going to Azerbaijan.
Do you have confidence in Ashraf Ghani?
Slightly more than I had in his predecessor.
But not much.
Moderate amount. And we're going to have allies in this conflict that are going to be helpful and others that are not. You look at the Nigerian government, it's a little better than its predecessor. You look at Somalia, things are a little better. But this has lasted 2 decades already.
I want to bring in Major General James Spider Marks, our CNN military analyst. He's retired U.S. Army. Kim Dozier, our global affairs analyst as well. You know this situation over there, Spider. It looks like it's another situation where Iraq, the U.S. spends an enormous amount of money, trains a lot, hundreds of thousands of military personnel, and when the going gets rough, they disappear.
Yeah, the sad fact is that unless there is some glue that holds these forces together, over the course of time, it will dissipate in terms of a fighting force, and we've seen that quite a bit. We realize that in order for us to be successful, to achieve our national security interests, this is what it's all about. How do we get out of a very close fight here that potentially is in the United States and take it elsewhere? That is intergenerational. This is what we call the new normal. This is the constant state of conflict that this nation has now accepted as a result of conditions that we see around the globe. Our engagement overseas is a must in order for us to preclude what is an inevitability where this will be closer on our shores. It's going to happen unless we engage overseas.
Kimberly, you've spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, including in Helmand Province, obviously in Kabul as well. What's your analysis of what's going on?
Well, I would say, to be fair about the Afghan security forces, they have taken some of their heaviest casualties yet over the past year, but they have a real problem with logistics. Your correspondent over there mentioned corruption. The Afghan special forces are actually seen as one of the most effective fighting forces, but because of problems within their Ministry of Defense, they can't get some of the supplies they need, and they're at the front of the battle. So you have these differing things that are hobbling those security forces. They used to have American forces to prop them up in many of these situations. Now they're in a situation down in Helmand where they've always had problems getting supplies to those particular bases on the Afghan side. And now they're facing fierce fighting and not much backup. That's a problem that spells just a continuing back and forth, which is why the UN is saying at this point in Afghanistan, the Taliban hold more territory than The last time they held this much territory was 2001, when they were in control.
It was before the U.S. came in after 9/11 into Afghanistan. It looks like a horrendous situation. In Iraq, it looks pretty awful right now. There's a military offensive by Iraqi forces, Congressman, trying to retake Ramadi right now. The U.S. wants to help, but this government there in Baghdad, the government of Hyder al-Abadi, because of his alliance with Iran, because of the Shiite militias, they don't want U.S. military involvement other than a few airstrikes coming in to back them up. What does that say about the U.S. Role over these years if the Iraqis don't even want the United States to get involved and help them on the ground?
Well, the Shiite alliance based in Iran is perhaps more evil and more dangerous than even ISIS. They've killed a lot more civilians. They have killed far more Americans, both in Afghanistan and Iraq, and even our Marines in Lebanon several decades ago. And as much as we need to focus on getting rid of ISIS, we also need to focus on getting rid of Assad. Because as long as he's there, there's going to be an ISIS. As long as Maliki and the remnants of his regime and ISIS are oppressing the Sunnis, if it's not this ISIS, it'll be another ISIS.
Well, you have confidence in this new Iraqi prime minister, relatively new, Hyder al-Abadi, who seems much more interested in having an alliance with Iran than he does with the United States.
He's slightly better than his predecessor, but what we've done is turn the government in Baghdad is now kind of a satellite of Tehran. The one advantage of the current approach is that we've minimized American casualties. Anybody who promises immediate and painless victory is not going to give us immediate victory, and they are going to dramatically increase our casualties.
General, you can minimize American casualties very dramatically by simply pulling out all those U.S. forces from Iraq and from Afghanistan, for that matter, as well. Then there won't be any U.S. military casualties.
Well, very, very true, Congressman. I would have to challenge that as a strategy. To minimize U.S. casualties is not a strategy. What we need to be able to do is try to work as effectively as we can with the host nation so that we can achieve our goals. And I'm in complete agreement in terms of Baghdad's relationship with Tehran. It's sinful and it's incredibly painful to us moving forward if we don't have a balance in terms of what we can try to achieve relative to what Baghdad's trying to achieve. That's what diplomacy is all about. And an element of diplomacy certainly is the military. It's a derivative of what we're trying to achieve.
We can't have zero casualties, because even if we had zero casualties in the Middle East, we see San Bernardino. And so we have to be involved. And as long as we're involved at the present level in Iraq and Afghanistan, we may have the present level of casualties. This year we've lost only 21, even with this terrible incident in Afghanistan. We used to lose 21 in a single incident before. And even out of those 21, half have been accidents and half have been caused by the opponents and the enemy.
Well, let me, Kimberly, you have confidence in the Iraqi military right now that they're going to actually take Ramadi and then move on to other even more important targets like Mosul, the second largest city in Iraq, which has now for almost 2 years been under control of ISIS?
They have proved increasingly effective. They're not moving as fast as anyone in the United States would like to see them move, but this has been urban fighting to take back Ramadi. One thing that Baghdad has been responsive on is they haven't used Shiite militia in the retaking of this mostly Sunni city. So it won't be as fast as we want it, but it is moving in the right direction. ISIS will probably see, they've only got about 100 fighters, they think, inside Ramadi. They'll probably do one of their strategic retreats, and they actually intercepted a piece of paper that ISIS had been handing out to its fighters, telling them to commit atrocities as they exit places while dressed as Iraqi security forces. I can't independently verify that that's really what ISIS is handing out, but it may spell that they are changing their battle to an insurgency instead of trying to hold territory. That means the Iraqis have gotten more effective.
I used to, as frustrated as a lot of people are here in Washington, Congressman, that the Obama administration continues to refuse to provide weapons directly to the Kurdish Peshmerga, arguably the U.S. best friends in this fight against ISIS right now, insisting it's got to go through the central Shiite-led government in Baghdad. Is that okay with you?
It's not. Many of us on the Foreign Affairs Committee have been pushing to get the Peshmerga the U.S. arms they need. We're also frustrated by the rules of engagement. We have bombing raids, but we're trying to have zero civilian casualties. If we did that in World War II, we would have lost World War II. I was sitting there with the French ambassador telling me that we had 70,000 Frenchmen who died there due to Allied bombing. But when the Allies arrived at Normandy, they were welcomed with open arms. Right now, the Iraqi government is providing free electricity to ISIS. If we had the rules of World War II, we would be bombing the electrical facilities that provide electricity to the ISIS-governed areas.
Like in Mosul, you mean?
Exactly.
That's free electricity? I didn't know that.
Yep.
And so what does the U.S. say to the Iraqi government about that?
We say the government position is that we applaud your efforts to make sure that civilians are not inconvenienced. You have to inconvenience civilians governed by the enemy.
Brad Sherman, the congressman from California, thanks for coming in. Kimberly and Spider, thanks to you guys as well. Donald